Hi guys, I'm Shmee, hello and welcome back to the channel where you join me on a lovely day to head out for a fuel for thought in the McLaren Senna. Now it's been a while since we had an FFT where I take one of the Shmee-mobiles to go for a drive and discuss a topic of interest of choice, giving some of my thoughts and opinions, and the Senna hasn't been out for quite a while, it has to be said. After a lot of things last September, October, it then basically went into hibernation in November, December, then I promptly went away for the first about a third of this year, and it is finally time to take it out for a drive with some things in the works for what's coming up. I want to talk today though about hypercars, and I know there's a big question of, is this a hypercar? And we'll talk a little bit about that, but also, would I buy a hypercar or another hypercar, depending which way you think? What would that be? What do I think of cars like the Bugatti Chiron AMG 1, Aston Martin Valkyrie, and the future of cars like this as well? Would we see one of them in the future in the garage? Today then, let's take the Senna out for a drive, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty excited to get back behind the wheel. One slightly amusing thing is that I can, of course, now remove the Swiss vignette for 2020. That's been on since we were out at Supercar Owners Circle, where we had the car having a lot of fun, drove it all the way over from Munich into Switzerland, and then, of course, took part in some of the drag races as well. But to take a step on board here is always an event. It's always a very special thing. We need to get it started, button up on the roof. Oh yes, there we go. So, let's go for a drive, and I know it's going to be noisy in here, but enjoy the Senna. When it comes to a car that is extreme to experience, there is not much that is crazier than this car. As you can tell, any bump you feel through the stiffness of the chassis. In fact, any stone that you drive over, you hear pinging up off the tub. The whole feel of the thing is just that of a spaceship, and I have to shout because it's so loud in here, the rawness of it all. And this, you might say, is the definition of a hypercar, and let's talk about that, because the term hypercar about 20 years ago didn't really exist. In fact, in the early 2000s, the arrival of the Ferrari Enzo, the Porsche Carrera GT, the Mercedes SLR McLaren, those were all very much supercars. Hypercar arrived with the Bugatti Veyron, over 1,000 horsepower, insane performance, acceleration, top speed, but also price tag. And while 450 cars wasn't necessarily the most exclusive car that had ever existed, in fact there were only 400 Ferrari Enzos, the Carrera GT is just over 1,100, but a Porsche, so you'd expect there always to be significantly more. But really, this combination of performance, price tag, exclusivity, and the whole atmosphere that the car brings with it. Nowadays, we're spoiled to see so many more cars at this end of the price spectrum, at least, and performance spectrum that are available. The Bugatti Veyron was pretty much the only car of its time that was in 7 figures. Nowadays, you can choose between about 40 different cars that are in 7 figures, even multiple from some of the big manufacturers, whether that's Ferrari, whether it's LaFerraris or Monzas, Aston Martin with various continuation models, some of their Zagato creations, Valkyrie, Valhalla, McLaren of course, Elva, Speedtail, Sabre, Senna, you name it. There are so many more options now on the market in this hypercar segment. We do of course have the arrival of the mega car, thanks in part to Koenigsegg, I think, breaking into that barrier with the 1-to-1, the first car in production with over 1,360 horsepower, 1 megawatt of power. But really and truly now, you can list off quite a few that make those numbers, from the Bugatti Chiron and other Bugatti derivatives to the EV hypercars, the Rimac C2, the Pininfarina Battista, the Lotus Evija. This has almost become, dare I say it, normal to talk about 1,500 to 2,000 horsepower cars, and I'm just going really slowly, by the way, because of the cyclist and narrow roads that you might well have noticed. We're in the countryside, cycling has picked up in a big way recently. So the definitions of these terms have changed. Supercar, hypercar, they don't mean what they used to mean, and something that can go around a racetrack as fast as this, there are only 500 of these, and with the price tag of this, not that long ago, would certainly have been in this hypercar territory. Now, people buy these cars and they can also use them more. They've become more usable and daily drivable, and I'm not going to say it's fun to bring a car like this down a road as bumpy as the one that I'm currently driving, but you can get a little bit of the point that you can just take it out and you can just drive it without necessarily worrying too much. That's why I'm not even sure myself if this counts as hypercar. I see it both ways, but I can tell you from my experience of owning the Senna and also owning the Ford GT, which are both on this cusp of this territory, they've been very, very different to the seriously exciting supercars. The likes of the AMG GTs and the SLS Black Series, the other McLarens, the 675 LTs, for example, even my Ferraris, the FF GTC4 Lasso, the Porsches that I've owned, they're very, very different because there's so much more to watch out for. Whether it's the potential for any damage and the price tag that it might accrue as a result, and you'll know what happened to this almost 2 years ago, which thankfully I'm very relieved to say was actually finally settled a couple of weeks ago, yeah, a month or two ago, which has been a great burden off the back of my mind after nearly 2 years worrying about all of that and trying to get it sorted out in terms of the legal side and getting all of the costs covered, obviously. But finally I can relax a little bit. But you've got that, and you've also got the time it takes to get any parts if something does happen. They're not just sitting on shelves like, let's say, with the AMG GT, as we take 800 horsepower past, well, 1 horsepower, 1 horse at least, up the country lanes. Quietly does it. I don't want to startle the horse or something with the noises that this makes. So it's a very different thing. With a car like this, I can't so easily say to a friend, hey, you take it for a drive, you go out and have some fun with it, because of the potential for anything that happens. The front splitter, the diffuser, a mirror cap, the whole lot costs extortionate amounts of money. On top of that, you have the financing and also, lots going on here, you have the financing and also the insurance side, where there's so much more involved for every party as well, which gives you this sense of not having quite the same freedom. So my experiences to date, and don't get me wrong, I love having the Senna and the Ford GT, but they're not the same. I enjoy a lot having, let's say, for the price of this, 3 other cars and going for drives with friends where we can all enjoy them, all head out in different cars together and share that experience, where with this, I can't so easily say that. You know, everywhere where we park it, everywhere where we take it has to be considered. I mean, I know I'm just in auto. Let's go into active dynamics. Let's put it into dynamic mode, go manual, enjoy a little bit more of this. It's just silly. Today isn't about driving fast. I've driven this car on the Nordschleife, I've driven this car around, well, down the Autobahn at 200 odd miles an hour. I've taken it on a lot of silly, very fun roads, but today, just enjoying it. Yeah. It gets light so easily. It gets so light. You just have to watch out and keep a bit of common sense about you. Now, I'm lucky with the Senna, and in general the Ford GT, the brake pads are an exception, that their servicing costs aren't crazy. That's one of the reasons for choosing these 2 cars. This is basically like servicing a 720S. It's like £1,000 a year. I'm sure there'll be some bigger costs down the line, but at the moment, it's not too bad. The GT's oil change is about half that, but it needs to be done more frequently. And then on top of that, it depends. If you need something specific for the GT, then it might get expensive. If it's just a general Ford kind of service or part or whatever it is, then it's not actually all that bad at the end of the day. So these 2 are fairly livable cars. Some of the older hypercars, like the Porsche Carrera GTs, carry very high costs. SLRs, incredibly expensive to keep an SLR fully maintained. If you ever need new brakes, or let's hope it never happens, but a new carbon fibre hood, if something happens, the bonnet on an SLR is over £100,000, which is, I mean, it's one single carbon fibre piece, made obviously now if you need one, so you don't really want to be in that position, to be completely honest, and that's, I would say, a big deterrent. But even the new cars, even the new hypercars, the prices are so far above this. It's easy to forget, but a Bugatti Chiron will cost you £2.5 million. An AMG 1 will cost you £2.5 million. An Aston Martin Valkyrie with the track pack will cost you over £3 million. A Gordon Murray T50, same kind of story. Whatever you can think of, they are basically triple this or more. Triple this at new price to get into what would be my dream hypercar. We'll touch more on that in a second. So it's not the same game, and to be completely honest, I'm well aware that I've stretched myself into the Ford GT and the Senna. I talked a lot at the time, you might remember, with how I went into financing to get both of these cars together because I couldn't afford to buy them both at the same time, and I make no secret about that, and it's thanks to the team that's now approved motor finance for making all of that possible, and obviously financing pretty much the entirety of my fleet through to today, and obviously keeping all of this together. So that's what made it possible for me. But the step up from here to that next category would basically be selling everything I have. I would have to sell all of the cars to purchase one hypercar, and I have no interest in that. I actually talked a lot about this back when I got my blue Focus RS in July 2017, about how I prefer experiencing different things, and I drive so much, whether I'm filming the videos or what I'm doing, that I prefer to be able to hop from one car to another and always feel like I'm trying something different than I would to have one hypercar that I'm so scared of the mileage because of bank restrictions or insurance restrictions or mileage restrictions or whatever it is that I can do with it, not to mention extremely high costs that might come as a result. So for me, I enjoy a car that I can take out and not feel the pressure. And you know, it's taken me now the best part of 2 years to be more comfortable driving this car because of what happened to it sitting at 15 miles per hour or so in traffic, where I was in my lane and unfortunately got clipped by a truck that was coming past. I mean, I couldn't control it, I couldn't do anything by it. It just happens, and it's a pressure in the back of your mind wherever you're going, whatever you're doing. Wow, we've got about 4 police cars here. I have no idea why. Off into the woods. That's moderately worrying about what that might be for. Absolutely no idea. Anyway, you kind of, I think, see where I'm coming with this. Now, what makes a car really special? We are spoiled, as I said, to be in a world where there are so many of these very capable machines, all limited edition, all extreme in the way they look and the way they feel and the experiences you have when you buy them. But so many of them, I feel, exist nowadays because they can be sold, because they can make some money for the company, not with the same passion as cars in the past. And it's what I talk about all the time with my Ford GT and what makes that stand out to me. But when it comes to most of the new cars, there isn't the same flair that there was, I think, in decades previously. And one car that really stands out to me, and this is no secret, you'd probably be able to guess exactly what I'm about to say, is the AMG 1. I'm a big fan of what Mercedes and AMG are up to, a big fan of what's happened with Mercedes, obviously, and their successes in Formula 1. The Mercedes-AMG Petronas team is actually here in the UK, as opposed to over in Germany. I'm a big fan, of course, of Lewis Hamilton. I actually grew up very near to where Lewis Hamilton grew up as well, and a big fan generally of the brand and the other cars, obviously, that I'm lucky enough to own and drive in my garage and share with you from, well, wearing the 3-pointed star, we could say. So the AMG 1 has something that the others don't. It has the Formula 1 engine. It has a very strong reason to exist, bringing that immense success into the road. Now, one thing that's a bit annoying about this car as we come to the 20-mile-an-hour zone here is lift system up, because we have about 8 speed bumps in a row in the 20-mile-an-hour zone. You can keep the lift system at least up in this car. Oh, that's rough. That's really rough. So what I was saying earlier about being able to use these cars and actually drive them, maybe I take that back slightly, because when you go over these bumps, you regret those kind of decisions. So yes, make no secret, the AMG 1 stands out to me. A lot of people often, I think, joke that I must have one on order. I am afraid to say that I don't. I would not be in a position to afford an AMG 1, and I would certainly not be in a position to use an AMG 1 in the way that I would like to be able to use it. And I think that's critical. And it's so easy to get carried away and think about buying a car, but it's so much more enjoyable when you can go into a car that's, you know, that one step down, but you can do whatever you want with it. You know, a Cayman GT4 instead of a McLaren 12C. A car that you can go out, I say that actually, a 12C is probably depreciated enough that they're not much above Cambridge GT4s, but anyway, they do cost a lot more to service, so it would be the same kind of point. And it's the same for me. I'd prefer to be able to enjoy the Senna and the GT than I would to go and own a car that's amazing to look at, but I wouldn't be able to drive it, and you guys would just be disappointed that I'm not happy to drag race it, I'm not happy to take it on a continental road trip, and I'm not happy to do silly miles just because at the end of the day I wouldn't be able to afford what could happen and the costs involved along the way. So I think the gauge of what's a hypercar, that was a very loud stone, the gauge of what's a hypercar has clearly shifted dramatically. It's moved into this new territory. But what I think is particularly special about this car, not for the purposes of driving it on a countryside loop right now, but in general terms, is that I doubt there will ever be a production road car that's faster on a racetrack than this, that isn't a hybrid or an EV. I think that this is as quick as combustion engines alone are going to get on a racetrack, and I think that's pretty cool, if you ask me. And I feel very lucky that I've been able to experience this car on track, on the Nurburgring multiple times, also at Spa. I did the 2-day pure McLaren at Spa, but even beyond that, driving the McLaren factory car at Estoril. It's so hard to get to the red line in here because there's so much power and torque. 800 horsepower, 800 newton meters, and when you put your foot down in gear, whatever you do, it will light up. Second gear, it will light up. It's just a mad machine. It's just a mad machine. Like I said, today is about giving it a run just because I hadn't for such a long time, with the strange way that things have kind of unraveled, because after September, October, like I said, when I had it around Germany, you probably remember, actually I think it was early November that it came back and had its service at McLaren Stuttgart. It sat here for a month or two, and then I had my unplanned, very long adventure away after departing the UK before it shut down, and then obviously it shut down, so there was no point in coming back. So it's good to get it out again. Every previous time it's been raining. When I took the Ford GT out, it wasn't too bad. I did think about this. I did think about driving this that day, but yeah, I kind of changed my mind because you can see how slippy it is, and I don't want to take chances. It's too expensive. If I get something wrong, it's not going to be fun. So I don't want to. I don't want to risk that. But overall, with something like the McLaren Senna, it's hard to. I mean, you don't need anything like this capability. But it's hard to imagine anything that's more of an experience than this as well, because that's what so much of it is about. And not driving the car too often does give you that experience. Taking it for a drive just now, even though it might look like I'm babying it and driving like a granny, I'm at the speed limits, I'm having fun, and I'm enjoying it. And that's what so much of this is all about. You know, there are places to be silly, like racetracks and like proving grounds and runways and that kind of thing. And you know how much I do that anyway from the other videos that I'm sure you guys have seen. But what's a hypercar? What is a hypercar? One person's definition is not the same as another person's. Will I buy a hypercar, a current generation, what we would call a hypercar? Not in a hurry. I would prefer to grow my collection, and now that I'll have more space in the new garage, I prefer that collection effectively to have meaning, to be cars that I've chosen to have in there for a reason, not just because it's the most expensive thing that I could afford, but because that car has a story for me or connects to another car that's in the garage. Just overall has a purpose to enjoy it. This thing's silly. It's just silly. And I think that's probably enough of my thoughts for now then on this topic. I'd love to hear what some of you think as well about what is a hypercar. What do you think is that barrier to entry to hypercar? Is it specifically the number that are made, the price of the car, the 0 to 60, which I would argue is completely irrelevant? Is it the lap time, which you'll never have a fair test of anyway? The Nurburgring lap record, in which case, what about the GT2 RS and AMG GT Black Series, which are definitely not what we would call hypercars, but are the last two effective record holders? Who knows? And the Aventador SVJ, again, not a hypercar. There are 1,826 of them, something like that in total, with all of the different iterations. Oh, plus maybe the Zargos. I don't know if the Zargos count out of the main 800 Roadsters or if they're extra cars. But again, you get my point. what is a hypercar? There's no definition. A megacar in the future is going to be a very clear definition because it represents a megawatt of power. That is irrelevant of what the numbers are on paper, how many there are, and what price it is. If it has a megawatt of power, it must be a megacar. And who knows what's going to be the term that comes after that. I certainly don't. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me for my ramblings and musings today, guys, about this topic while taking the Senna out for a gentle little run. Be sure to stay tuned because, well, there might be a complicated little something coming up, but very shortly this is going to be back in action for some real fun, and I cannot wait to share this with you and hopefully back over to the continent at some point before too long. On a beautiful day though, that's it for now. Thank you again and for your support. As always, guys, it is appreciated more than you could ever imagine. But that's it for this time, and I'll see you again very soon. Cheers!